Physiology? Is it, do you find it awesome, as I do? Well, next semester, this semester was kind of, you got cheated out of interactive physiology this semester. Next semester, you're going to use it a lot more. So you'll see there's some for a lot of different systems. Cardiovascular, respiratory system. There's an immunity, which is also a difficult concept. There's an endocrine system one. So you'll use it a lot more next semester. But it's a great, 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 great study tool. Yes? Don't you think? Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, so yeah, it would be nice if you could see that, correct? Yeah, it usually is helpful. Guess what I have on the screen?
A muscle?
Actually, several.
In a snowstorm?
No. Well, that's what it looks like right now. Okay. So what are muscles for?
The movers.
I do have one question.
Yes, dear.
The sequence of excitation, contraction of the skin muscle, do we need to know that whole?
No, that's a second messenger system.
Yeah.
You have to understand that that's a second messenger system and some of the differences. So you see some different proteins like calmodulin in there versus troponin, tropomyosin. So just the differences.
Okay, thank you.
When we discuss hormones next semester, we will talk about second messenger systems in more detail. But that term should be familiar to you because we've heard it several times first semester. See what you're going to miss second semester? I know. You should just come. Because we'll yeah, come randomly. We'd love to see you. Yeah, take work off. All right, so when we talk about muscles, the naming of muscles, there's a couple of different factors that can be involved. The shape of a muscle, whether it's circular or parallel or pennate or convergent, might come into play when we discuss naming a muscle. When muscles have to move something, the direction of the fibers are going to indicate where the movement happens or how the movement happens. So on page 320 in your textbook, you see a list under naming skeletal muscles of some of the different things involved in naming skeletal muscle. So the actions of muscle may be involved, where it crosses over, bones it's attached to. I'll give you an example. There's a muscle that starts at the mastoid process on the base of the skull, goes underneath the clavicle, and attaches to the sternum. Do you know what its name is? Yeah, the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Yes? And it's named for what? All the bones it's attached to, all the bones it interacts with. So naming of muscles can be done based on where it is, location. Temporalis. Where is it? Yeah, exactly. So it could be named for bones it's lying over. Frontalis, temporalis. The muscle shape. Deltoid triangular. That's what deltoid means. The size of the muscle. What is that?
Gluteus maximus.
No, actually it's three things. The biggest one is the maximus. Then there's a medius, and then there's a minimus. So that is three different muscles. The gluteus maximus, the gluteus medius, and the gluteus minimus. Which one's the smallest? There you go. Which one's the biggest? There you go. So, it could be the size of the muscle that might be in its name. Huh?
I said I thought Maximus was
Was it Omen?
Roman.
Oh, a Roman. Yeah, because he was the biggest guy around, right? At least that's what they say. Number of origins. What's an origin? These are two terms we need to go. No, I think we heard them before. We'll dust off the brain. Origin and insertion. What's an origin? Where the muscle begins, where? You said something about the stationary attachment, point where the muscle is attached where it doesn't really cause any movement. And the insertion is attached to something it's going to do what? Move or pull on. So biceps, and we call them biceps because they have, just because we happen to be on the list, how many origins do the biceps have? 2. So they originate, up in the shoulder region, and they insert here, down where the radius and ulna are, so that when I contract them, they create that action. So location of the attachment, where it's attached to, we already gave an example of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And then the actions, adduction, abduction, flexion, extension, that might be also included in the naming of a muscle as well. So do we need to know those? Yes, we do. There's a great little muscle action focus on page 321 in your textbook. And if you see here, in one of these things, again, mastering is going to give you all kinds of wonderful tools. Have any of you checked out the little AP flicks? Those are within the chapter. So when you go into a chapter in mastering, and you're in the textbook part now, there's a whole bunch of stuff listed for that chapter. This one's nice because there's a whole bunch of diagrams. This can help you when you study for your lab exam, when you're trying to figure out how to label some of these guys. But you'll find under chapter 10 some of these tools, diagram labeling exercises. You'll also find these AP flicks. So you can see some of these things that help us distinguish movement in muscles as well. So know those. Know that fascicular arrangement, fascicles. What's a fascicle? No, it's a bundle of muscle fibers or muscle cells, fascicles. Just like we learned in the nervous system, same in the muscular system. So the arrangement of fascicles can also be used to name muscles as well. Do we have to know that? Yes, and that's this diagram here. I went ahead too quickly. So know these terms and understand what they mean as well. All right, who likes physics? Oh, I know. Kind of like you in anatomy. That's me in physics. Smart. I had to take physics for my undergraduate degree. It was a sad, sad semester. But anyways, I did learn a little something in my physics class. And the movements created by muscles, the ability for muscles to create movements, is based on some of the principles of physics. So when we look at this diagram here, and this is a diagram on page 323 in your textbook, figure 10.3, we see some different terms that we're going to have to understand. When you were in elementary school, did you do this little unit called simple machines? No? You didn't make a pulley or you discussed it? You didn't get to make it? That's the fun part of simple machines, when you get to make them. Well, that's basically what we're talking about here, the principles that you learned way back when you talked about simple machines. Back in the day, we didn't talk about simple machines, so yeah. And even if we did, exactly, I wouldn't have remembered. Yeah. So, some of the simple tools we use to make a simple machine are fulcrums. What's a fulcrum? Yeah, it's like a stationary point in which we work off of. Then we have some kind of lever, some kind of straight, solid that is attached to the fulcrum that we move off of. And then we have another group of things that are called effort and load when we have to move something through space. When I look at a simple machine like this, jack, to jack up your car, it's nice that we can kind of relate movements in the body to some of these simple machines. So we see in the jack that lifts our car, and that's a kind of a little piece of metal, isn't it? It lifts that whole honking car. Think about it. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Well, here's a little bone that does what for you? Carries your whole honking body around. And you ever move furniture with a friend? That's holding your honking body and the giant bureau your friend has to bring into his house. That's amazing, isn't it? So our muscle movements are like some of these simple machines. So the nice thing is we relate these terms to a simple machine, then we can relate them to movements in us. So fulcrum is that pivot point, that stationary point. The load in this case is what? The car I want to pick up. And the effort I'm going to apply is me pushing down on this lever, that stationary point in which to push this automobile off of. So we have to understand the lever system when we discuss different movements in the body. Here's another example, a different type of simple machine. When we have a shovel, believe it or not, it's a simple machine. If I asked you to go pick this up with your hands, could you do that? Yeah, it would be hard to do that, right? So you use this simple machine to lift this load. We have the same parts, but they're in different places. So we have the fulcrum, the steady point down here at the end. The lever is this wonderful handle of the shovel, and the effort is you picking up on that lever. The load would be whatever you have in the end of your shovel. So the lever system has several different ways that it can move a load. When we talk about muscles, you're moving a load. Yes? So when I've picked up this darn bag about 700 times already. But in order for me to pick up this bag, I need to do what? Put enough effort in to overcome the load. That's physics. You just learned physics. Isn't that amazing? Good, so we're done, right? Yep, there we go. I'd be all over that. All right, so there's different classes of levers depending on where these stationary points are, where the effort is, and where the load is. You have to, from this discussion, understand the three different types of lever systems and how they apply to you and your muscles and your bones. So the levers in us are what? Those stationary long points. What are they in you? Bones, exactly. Your skeleton. Where does the effort come from? The muscles contracting and pulling on that stationary point. So this is a first-class lever system where we have the load on one side, the fulcrum in the middle, and the effort on the other side. What does this remind you of? A seesaw. That's a first-class lever system. In the playground, you were learning physics. Did you know that? What happens if little skinny kid gets on one side and not so little skinny kid gets on the other side? Yeah, we can't overcome the what? The load. We're putting it nicely, yes? So the effort has to be able to overcome the load with respect to tension when we talk about muscles. Here's an example of a first-class lever system in a simple tool that we use all the time, scissors. And when we talk about us as humans, you going like this is an example. So where's the load? This head. And I have to contract muscles in the back, the effort, so that I can teeter on a stationary point, which is the base of the skull on the spinal cord. Yes? So that's an example of a first-class lever system in you. The second type of lever system is a second-class lever system. Fulcrum's all the way on the end, the load's in the middle, and the effort's on the opposite end. Example of that would be a wheelbarrow, picking up stuff. Okay, you can pick up a lot more stuff with a wheelbarrow than you can with just picking it up with your hands. Example, you standing on your toes is an example of a second-class lever system. The fulcrum's on the end at the ball of your feet. The effort comes from where? What are those muscles in the back of your leg called? Who? Nobody? That's going to be on your list. You better find out. Thank you. The gastrocnemius muscles. And then the load is in the center. And then the third-class lever system. We have the effort where? Effort's in the middle, load's on one end, fulcrum's on the other end. I love the tweezers. Forceps would be better, but tweezers. Yeah, whatever. And then example would be me lifting up my bag over and over again. The fulcrum, that stationary point, is my elbow. The load is my bag. And the effort comes from who? The biceps muscle. We also have work being done by who? Triceps muscle. Because remember, muscles have to work synergistically together to create a movement. One may shorten, the other may lengthen in order for movement to take place. So, that's the end of chapter 10. Oh, why is that up there? Oh, son of a gun. Yes, you're going to have to know that. Where are you going to have to know it from? For? Lab. So if you haven't already started to look at your muscle diagrams for lab, I highly suggest that you start today, because you're going to have to know the anterior and posterior. These are only superficial muscles. How many muscles do we have? It's over 700-ish. Okay? How many bones did you have that you whined about memorizing? 206. Are you going to have to memorize all the muscles, though? No. That would be cruel and inhuman. When you go into physical therapy, if you go into kinesiology, are you going to have to know all the muscles? Yes, you are. Not only are you going to have to know all the muscles, but you're going to have to know the origin and insertion of each of those muscles. And you're also going to have to know the what? The action of those muscles. What does it move? So get busy. And that's what the rest of the book is. So if you flip through the pages, you see all of the wonderful diagrams of all of the muscles in the body. You see the action and insertion, the origin and insertion of all the muscles. You see the action of all the muscles. And you see the nerve supply of all the muscles. Not going to make you know that for lecture. Not even going to make you know that for lab. So we will pull out a select few. The diagrams that are up there, you should start working on now. And be grateful that you're not in medical school right now, because that's what you'd be doing. For the quiz, I have a hard time making 10 questions for that quiz. That's how. Oh, you're going to have one. But it's basically the naming of the muscles, the shapes and all of that stuff we just covered, the 3 different levers. That's pretty much it for chapter 10. Yes, so the question was, do we have to know all the diagrams in the book? No. Do you have to know all the muscles in the body? No. What do you have to know? The diagrams that are they're already up there. Has everybody seen them? If you haven't seen them, just scroll down the page. They're there. And anterior, posterior man, pretty much, and then some select ones that we can see separate muscles from. All right, here's a question. I have a question for you. Because I haven't created the exam yet for the lab. Would you rather see that big diagram with all the muscles on it? Or would you rather see separate diagrams with those same muscles, but easier to see? The big diagram. Yeah, see, I say easier to see, too. Yeah. But see, then you all get stressed out. If I give you a list of muscles you have to know, then it doesn't matter which diagram it's in. You're just going to have to know those muscles.
I just feel like the bigger ones you kind of see which one you want to where, and you can just kind of be like, oh, on yourself.
Okay.
Okay, so it's going here, so it's like that. Which one?
Okay. Yes?
If you break it down to smaller ones, you're saying, so if we have the full body diagram, you're gonna learn the whole thing. But if we use each individual different area of the body, we'll know what to focus on instead of the whole thing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that was my question. Would you rather see 10 diagrams of the separate part, like the head and the leg and the thing, or would you rather see that one big diagram with all the different parts? You don't think it matters?
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I like you're right, it's such a tiny little font.
Right. I love her expressions. They're beautiful.
So for our lecture exam, what are we going to need to know for chapter 10?
And you're just basically going to have to know what we just talked about for chapter 10.
We have to know, like, are you going to ask, where does this muscle attach?
Just what we've talked about within the first few pages. Okay, so if I ask you sternocleidomastoid muscle, you should know that. If I ask you deltoid muscle, you should know that, because that's in that discussion in the beginning. So we're done with chapter 10. Woo. So, any questions? All right, let's do the last chapter of the first semester. So here's the deal. Today's Tuesday. We'll finish this chapter up on Thursday. Your next exam, your last exam, will be on Tuesday of next week. So what the heck are we going to do? Yeah, we're going to, on Thursday of next week and on Tuesday of the following week, we're going to go through what? The entire semester. We're going to go through our PowerPoint extravaganza clicker questions. Yes? So we can talk, I will give you all this general information that I've created to help you study for the last day of classes, which will be your final exam on the material. I know, you believe it?
So we're not taking our final until
The last day of classes, yes. You what?
won't we have extra classes?
You're going to have 2 classes, and we're going to basically go through that crazy long group of clicker questions that I've created. So today we're going to start chapter 5. Thursday we're going to finish chapter 5. Next Tuesday we are going to have an exam on chapters what? 5, 9, and 10, which is basically what? 9 and 10, yeah. No, 9 and 5, right? Whew, this might be a really good opportunity for you to boost your test grade. Because there's not a lot, compared to what you've had to study in the past, right? If you study just as hard for this exam, you're probably going to get a way better grade, yes?
Still going to be 100 questions?
No. It would be hard to squeeze out. We'll see, yeah. Is there going to be any essays on this exam?
Oh, probably a ton.
No. Okay?
On this one or the final?
There's no essays on the final, no. No essays on the...
Anymore?
No.
Oh my God, I don't even know what to do myself.
I don't. Get you. What are you going to do, though? What are you going to do? Yeah. Because, again, I repeat, this might be a real good opportunity to get an amazing grade, which would help to do what? Possibly boost your other grades, correct? So just throwing that out there. Okay? All right, so last but not least, in your exciting anatomy and physiology whirlwind trip this semester is chapter 5. And chapter 5 is the integumentary system. What's the integumentary system? Skin. Skin, somebody said it, hair and nails. Hair and nails are derivatives of the integumentary system. So when we talk about any organ system, just like we've already talked about in a couple of organ systems that we've hit, we're going to talk about different types of tissue that come together to create an organ. So, same thing goes for the integumentary system. What types of tissue do we find in the integumentary system? Connective tissue. Epithelial tissue. Adipose tissue underneath. So when we look at skin, the structure of skin, we see 3 distinct layers. The very top layer, the stuff you're looking at now, is made of epithelial cells. What kind of epithelial cells? Stratified squamous epithelial cells. Yes, everybody knows what that means. With basement membrane, which is what? In this? Where's the basement membrane? What are we calling it in this slice? Where the epithelial tissue is attached to the connective tissue. It is the basement membrane, but what are we calling it here? Nope. It's called the papillary layer. So the epidermis is what? Epithelial cells. 5 layers of epithelial cells attached by the papillary layer to, which is the basement membrane we discussed so many times when we discussed tissues, to the connective tissue underneath. What do we call that connective tissue in skin? what we call reticular layer, or the dermis. The dermis consists of the place where the epidermis is attached, the papillary layer, and a whole bunch of reticular fibers and collagen fibers in the reticular layer of the dermis. So the dermis has the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Underneath the dermis, there's a nice little layer of adipose tissue. That's called the what? The hypodermis, or underneath the skin, sometimes referred to as subcutaneous. What the heck is cutaneous? Cutaneous is what? Yeah, it's another name for skin. So, what we'll learn in this chapter is what all these different parts consist of and what they do for us with respect to the largest organ in your body, your cutaneous or integumentary system. So, first we start talking about the epidermis. Now, the epidermis is made up of epithelial cells, but that's not all we're going to find in the epidermis. The cells themselves that create that stratified squamous epithelial layer are called keratinocytes. They're called keratinocytes because they contain a waterproofing chemical called keratin, or in some way, shape, or form on its way to containing keratin through the layer. Now, what's keratin again? It's a protein, and what does it do? Yeah, it's a waterproofer. It helps what? Bruising? What's bruise? Do you know what a bruise is? Yeah, blood vessels that break where? Helps prevent bruising? Maybe because it makes your epidermis tougher? Oh, never heard that one. Oh, no. Carrots help your eyes, yeah. She was confused. Yeah, no, I never heard that one. But the cells themselves then, the epithelial cells themselves contain keratin. Keratin is a waterproof. Remember when we looked at tissues way back when? We had keratinized and non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelial cells. Well, guess where the keratinized stratified squamous epithelial cell slide was? Yeah, it was skin. Yes? Non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelial cells would be something on the inside, like your esophagus. We don't need to waterproof those cells. Why do we need to waterproof you? Yeah, so what happens, and now here we're going to stir up some memories from the beginning of the semester. What happens when cells are in hypotonic solutions? They burst. What happens when they're in hypertonic solutions? They shrink. So that covering that you have, we want to make sure we try to keep the cells' integrity and don't allow them, depending on what you expose them to too much water, taking on too much water, or shrinking too much. That can damage the keratinocytes. So keratin is extremely important. The other thing we're going to find, and this is sort of at the base where those cells are growing, is a group of cells called melanocytes. The melanocytes in this diagram are those little gray cells, and they are very close to the dermis, the bottom layers of those epithelial cells. Melanocytes secrete a pigment called melanin. Does anybody know what melanin does for you? It protects your skin, specifically your genetic material and your DNA, from damage by the sun. UV light can be very damaging and can actually cause your DNA to mutate. So some of us have melanocytes that produce more melanin than others. What do we see outwardly? Darker skin. So people who produce more melanin, they don't even have more melanocytes, believe it or not. They just have cells that produce more melanin, have darker skin because the pigment is darker. And it's sort of like a little umbrella. As these cells grow, melanocytes will spit out melanin, and the epithelial cells will engulf that melanin, bring it into the cell through endocytosis. And we'll see little granules that kind of cover that genetic material. When you expose yourself to too much sun, UV rays, what happens to those cells? They don't die. What do? They produce more melanin. So even a very dark-skinned person, if they're out in the sun, are they going to produce more melanin? Yes. It's a protection mechanism for your genetic material. So darker-skinned people tend to be located in places where there are more sun or there is more sun exposure. They survive better than lighter-skinned people who do what? Well, they burn and they get all kinds of mutations in their skin because they don't have enough protection from the UV rays. So that's the only difference between a dark-skinned person and a light-skinned person, the amount of melanin their melanocytes produce. And that's from, it's a genetic message that you have. The other group of cells that we're going to find down here are dendritic cells. And what do dendritic cells do? One of the dendritic cells we're going to find down there are called Langerhans cells. And a nice little German man found those out many, many years ago. These guys are going to help us protect our bodies from any foreign substances that might be encountered in the skin. That's your outside covering to the world, isn't it? It would be nice if I had some cells that were kind of hanging out there watching out for anything that might enter the body. So the Langerhans cells we'll talk about again when we talk immune response and the immune system. So they're going to help protect us from foreign substances. And then the other thing, and we're going to kind of experiment with this week in lab, we have is nerve endings, tactile receptors. We have receptors for a whole bunch of different stimulus. We have thermoreceptors for what? Temperature. We have nociceptors for pain. And we have pressure receptors for what? Yeah, to give us an idea of what's in the environment around us. Tactile receptors like Merkel discs. Those are the guys that are going to help us figure out shape and density. And we find these sensory receptors in the skin. So do we have all receptors everywhere in our skin? Some receptors, depending on what we get exposed more to in different places, will be more in number in certain places than in others. Did I already show you this neat experiment? Yeah, pinch that as hard as you possibly can. It's not going to hurt. Is there damage going on there? Oh, yeah. But is it going to hurt? Why? Yeah, no pain receptors there for some reason. We weren't made that way. So we can look really tough if we pinch our elbow as hard as we can. No, I don't know. I don't think so. You're going to have to go pinch a baby, yeah.
Does keratin have anything to do with, when you like wash your dishes and your fingers, does that?
Well, if you expose your skin to too much water, eventually they're going to have the effects of taking on too much or shriveling up. So when you're in the bathtub, what happens sometime? You get all pruny and wrinkly. When you go in the ocean, same thing. All right. It's not, but it's only noticeable there because you have kind of little folds and ridges there. So it's all over, but it's more noticeable in places with ridges. We'll talk about the ridges and what they are too. All right, so there's different layers of the epidermis. The bottom layer, the beginning, where the cells are alive, because they're closest to the dermis. What do you think is in the dermis for the epidermis? Blood supply, which means what? Food, right? Is there any blood supply in epithelial layers? No. So in the epidermis, there's no blood supply. It's avascular. So the living cells in a stratified layer of epithelium is closest to the connective tissue it's connected to. In this case, it's the dermis. So in thick skin versus thin skin, we're going to see 5 layers. So I'll give you an example. We have some really thin-skinned areas on our face, but we have some thick-skinned areas. Well, some of us do. Some of us don't do much to get thick-skinned areas. But, you know, at the end of your fingers, those little thick-skinned areas, who doesn't have any? You need to do a little more work, girl. Push a broom every once in a while. Yes? You feel those thick areas? You have them at the bottom of your feet, too. That's thick skin. So when we talk about thick skin, there's 5 different layers. In thin skin, there's one of the layers missing. And if you look at this diagram, you'll say, well, Maria, I only see 4 layers. Well, what kind of skin might this be? It's thin skin. Okay. So the bottom layer is called the stratum basale. And the stratum basale is where the cells of the epithelial layer are originating. I'm not going to be able to say that word. It's where the cells germinate, where they grow. There's a special word for it. It's in your book. I can't, it's not coming out today. But it's right there under stratum basale. Yeah. That's it. I don't know why I can't say it today. I definitely need coffee. But that's where the cells grow. The cells grow here. These are the ones that have the ability to undergo mitosis. And as they grow, they're going to move their way up. Do you ever hear that little song about bunnies in the bed? And one turns over, and then the one on the end falls out. Monkeys in the bed, bunnies in the bed. You know that song. Yes? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? One gets in, and they all roll over, and one falls out. Yeah. 7 in the bed. And there's a whole bunch of different songs. But that's kind of how skin works. As one cell germinates and grows, it's going to push up on the layer. And what happens to the one on the end? They flake off. The cells, as they push their way further away from their food supply, are going to do what? They're going to die. So everything you see, that skin on the outside, that's the very outermost layer called the stratum corneum. That's all dead. So the stratum basale, a couple of layers of cells, they're mitotic. As we move up, what's going to happen to the cell as it moves further away from its food source is it's going to start to die. And one of the things that you're going to see in these cells is very distinct little dots. Those little dots are packages of chemicals that are going to become much more evident as the cells move further away from their food source. So the second layer, the one above the stratum basale called the stratum spinosum, we're going to start to see the cells start to look almost spiny. As we move a little bit further away, we see much more distinct dots in the stratum granulosum. And again, those dots are full of things like keratin and melanin, and we can see those granules very clearly under the microscope. In thick skin, there would be another layer in here. It's called the stratum lucidum. And basically what we see is cells that look very clear almost. And then in thin skin, and in thick skin, we have the final layer called the stratum corneum. About 20 to 30 cell layers thick. And the ends are going to do what? Flake off. So if I look at skin under the microscope, I can see those little ribbons that I described in lab to my lab students in keratinized epithelial cells at the top. Again, that's the stratum corneum. So, know the different layers of epithelial cells. This is a nice little histology picture. It should look very familiar to you, yes? So what's the stuff on the bottom? The dermis. What kind of tissue is it? Reticular connective tissue. The epithelial layer and the dermal layer don't meet flat like this. They meet like this and create little ridges as the epithelial layer grows. That layer is called the papillary layer. Do you ever see one of those little egg crate mattress thingies? That's kind of how the dermis and the epidermis fit together. That layer where they fit together is called the papillary layer. And that's why when you look at it under the microscope, the epithelial layer looks like it's in waves, because it meets the dermis in waves. As it grows in waves. And what's it create on the surface of your skin? Ridges. Ridges that represent its meeting with the dermis underneath. Ah, are all our ridges the same? No, we have ridges all over the place. It's just some of them are very stretched out and not as obvious. Where are the ones very obvious to us? In the extremities. You have ridges everywhere. Some are deeper than others in places where you bend more often. But these friction ridges at the fingertips, also called dermatoglyphics, or what? Fingerprints, have a very distinct pattern. And we see cleavage lines where we get a lot of bending through the body. So, what does a CSI person really love to find?
Fingerprints.
A fingerprint. What leaves the fingerprint? Oils. Oils that we're going to talk about where they come from in a moment. But they come from sudoriferous and sweat glands, or sweat glands, as well as sebaceous glands. These secretions, sweat and oil, on the surface of your skin leave residual behind when you touch things. You leave a lot more residual behind. Have you ever done this? You look out a window. We used to drive my mother crazy because we'd put our lip prints and our nose print on our forehead print on the window. Because it's cute. Yeah, yeah. The kids, you know. It's cute when the grandchildren do it. It's not good when the kids do it. Yes, sir.
Is it possible not to have fingerprints? Because my grandmother, when she was young, she worked like slave labor or something, I don't know. But she worked a lot with like bleaching clothes, and she has no fingerprints. Like she has like no lines on her hands because she's like just bleached her hands too much. But like, does she still leave like oil behind?
Yep.
Or is she just perfect crime material?
No, she'll leave oil behind, but the pattern. Yeah, she could, yeah. You could have her murder somebody for you. It would be great. No, doesn't have to wear gloves, doesn't have to wipe down the scene. Perfect. Give her a buzz. Or if you're foolish enough to have a little accident. Did I tell you about my accident? Did I tell you? Don't, yeah.
Yeah, my brother did that one.
Yeah. Gone.
On the scissors and
Yeah.
screaming and shaking his hand and blood was going everywhere. That's what
Yeah, I was talking to my mother on the phone and trying to open a plastic bag with a very sharp knife, and I lopped off the entire pad of my finger. Yeah, but see, yep, they have scissors for that, but I couldn't find mine. So yeah, you can get rid of your friction ridges that way, huh?
So you could do the crime, just you have to.
Only with the very tip of my index finger. Yep. And what else? Not usually with the epithelial cells because the outer epithelial cells are dead. But if there was a struggle, for example, and you scraped yourself and you got some of those lower epithelial cells that still had the nucleus intact, well, that's like party time for a CSI, right? Even bigger party time is if we find one of these. What's this? That's a hair. So when we talk about dermis, we see that the papillary layer, reticular layer, and flexure lines are all part of some of the outer ridges. That papillary layer, again, is where the epidermis meets the dermis. The reticular layer contains a whole bunch of stuff. The whole bunch of stuff we're going to talk about comes from this diagram. I have to go back. So in that reticular layer, we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff like blood vessels, for example. We're going to see nerve structures, those Meissner's corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles. These are all little nerve endings for you to feel touch and pressure on all of that. We're going to find that there. We're going to find hair follicles, where hair originates, because hair is basically what? It's epithelial cells. It's a derivative of your skin. It comes from your skin. It's going to grow the exact same way as the epithelial layer does, except it's going to start down at the bottom and push its way up. So this stuff here is what? It's all dead. But if you grab one and pull on it, A, it's going to hurt. How come? At the base of it, there's a whole bunch of little nerve structures that are going to sense the damage. But you're also going to pull out some live cells. So if you look at the end of your hair, you got this little bulb-looking thing at the end. Those are live cells. Again, gold to the CSI, because what can they do now? Yeah, they can take those few cells because of DNA technology and how it's progressed, and they can make a whole bunch of copies of your genetic material, and they can sequence it and see who the... What? Oh, do you want to know why your hair turns gray? You know, all these years, blonde people have gotten a bad rap. And I don't agree with this, but what do they sometimes call a blonde person? No. Oh, well, there's a lot of names for blonde people. I was thinking of one, airhead. Yes? Remember the melanocytes I was talking about? Produce pigment? Well, not only do they produce pigment for your skin, they also produce pigment for your hair. What happens when they stop doing that? They still work. They still spit stuff up, but you know what they spit out? Air bubbles. So no longer. That's why, you know, when you get the gray hair, it's like, wing. It doesn't lay down nice with the rest of the hair. It's like coarse and hello, here I am.
You got the Albert Einstein thing going on. Trust
Right.
me, I know. I've got a ton of the little lights in here.
I myself don't have any gray hair, but I hear that's how it happens. But yeah, those are air bubbles. That's why it's coarse. Actually, sometimes, depending on diet and different environmental factors, you can kick them back into action. But like sometimes I'll get a haircut. Well, now it doesn't happen anymore because there's just way too many grays. But sometimes I'd get a haircut and my family would think I dyed my hair. And my hairdresser actually showed me, he pulled out a hair once. I had gray on this end and dark on this, so the melanocytes kicked back in and started producing pigment again. But yeah, when they stop doing that, then yeah, you're gray. So diet can help extend the life of your melanocytes, but you're destined to be gray. So the true airhead is not a blonde person. It is one with gray hair. Yeah, well, you're definitely, yeah, dye your hair, nobody else. And then you kill like brain cells and stuff. It's like, I'll just live with my gray hair, thank you. Okay, so where the heck were we? In the dermis. So we're going to talk about some of these derivatives then that come from the dermis. And the first one they discuss is hair. Before we get too far, don't forget about skin color. Skin color, melanin. Melanin is a contributor, but other things are contributors too. Other things that cause you to have the skin pigment you have is not only melanin, but how many blood vessels are near the surface of your skin. Did anybody ever get embarrassed and turn what? Why? Yeah, those blood vessels that are down near the hypodermis push their way up to release heat. When you exercise and produce too much heat, what's a quick way to get rid of excess heat? Have those blood vessels move closer to the surface and dilate. So you see more of the red pigments in hemoglobin when those blood vessels are closer to the surface. The other thing they talk about is a pigment called keratin. And some of you younger people probably won't remember this. Some of you in-between people might. You remember the Magic School Bus?
Yes.
Loved that show.
We used to watch it in fourth grade all the time.
Yeah.
It's on Netflix a little bit ago, and I watched it again.
Yeah, watch the episode with skin. When one of the kids, the redheaded kid, eats way too many orange snack things and turns orange. They didn't call them Cheetos, though that would have been, they called them something else. But pigments from different foods you eat, like keratin, things that are in carrots and tomatoes, have like an orange tinge to them. And you will see them in your skin. So those are also part of your skin pigments. So
When I was a baby, I fed him like carrots. When I first started him on like food, I fed him like way too many carrots and like squash and sweet potatoes and
yeah, he turned a little orange.
everything was orange. His skin and everything.
She tried to turn her kid into a pumpkin.
Well, he had bright orange hair.
There, oh, it's because you fed him all those carrots.
His allergies.
So, yeah, that comes out in your skin too. So some of the things you eat, some of the things you eat might have an effect on your cellular function. What? That crazy concept, isn't it? So melanin, hemoglobin, keratin, all part of your skin color. Sometimes we get a crazy little spot on our skin where a whole bunch of melanin gets produced randomly. And they talk a little bit about moles. We'll talk about those guys at the end too. We have to pay close attention to those guys, don't we? Yeah, because sometimes when melanin production goes wild and melanocytes become mutated, they can cause what kind of cancer? Melanoma. So it's melanoma is cancer of the what? Melanocytes in the skin. So those are all mentioned here under skin color. So the next thing the book talks about is appendages of the skin. And the first thing we see is hair follicles. So hair, just like the epidermis on skin, hair is an epidermal derivative of skin. We're going to find this part down in the dermis. And we see hair follicles all over your entire body. But we as humans don't tend to produce as much hair all over our entire body. Maybe some of our ancestors produce hair all over their entire body, but we don't. Unless you're Italian, then you produce hair all over your entire body. Yes? Yep. Male or female, by the way. So, yeah, and hair in many animals, in us, what's hair for? besides to be a pain in the neck and have to get cut every 5 weeks. Yeah, it helps to what? Yeah, hold in what? Heat. But in my dog, for example, who swears she's king of the mountain, every time she goes outside and hears a noise, what happens to her? The hair on the back of her neck puffs up. So what's it for? You just said it. It makes them look bigger. It makes them look scarier. So hair has many different reasons or many different purposes in many different animals. And there are nerves and muscles associated with hair follicles.
So I have greyhounds, and they have human hair. So why does their hair never grow?
They have human hair?
Yeah, because they're hyperallergenic.
So they have hair, not fur.
Right, but why does it never grow? Why is it's just always super small?
Super short. I don't know, because that's their genetics.
It just falls out.
Yep. And that's what happens to you.
Regrow to that length? Just
No, your hair grows long, as we know. And dogs, now that you mention it, there's certain types of dogs with certain types of hair on their bodies. Fur versus hair. So the fur tends to hold dander and particles in it, and some people are allergic to that dander and particles in dogs with fur versus dogs with hair. Now, dogs with hair, except for many of the dogs with hair, except for ones like that, have to be what? You have to go bring them to the hairdresser and cut their hair just like you do. Not with those guys, though. I didn't think, though. I thought greyhounds had fur, though.
because I'm allergic to pet dander.
Huh. Well, maybe it's because they're so short. I don't know. Got to Google that. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Every once in a while, when you get older, you'll notice that little hairs grow in places. All of a sudden have an eyebrow that's 12 feet long with the stuff coming out of your ears. Yeah. Everything goes to hell when you get older. Huh? Oh, yeah. It's just, again, because of the different hormonal influences on hair growth. Hair growth is kind of a secondary sex characteristic as well. So just like in the dog, in males, they grow more hair, makes them look what? Bigger and stronger. And that's a result of some of the differences in hormones in males versus females. All right, back to hair. Hair is amazing, isn't it? So it grows down in a hair follicle, down in the dermal region, very similar to what we saw in the epidermis. That connective tissue that holds it in is here, and it's called the papilla. The base of the hair follicle is the matrix, and this is where we see those live cells. So we have the same kind of layers that will be created in the hair medulla in the middle and the cortex on the outside. And those outer layers, as they get pushed up, are going to be dead because they're further away from their blood supply. If you pull out a whole bunch of hair, can you make somebody's scalp bleed? Yeah. So our blood supply down there is going to supply nutrients to the growing cells in a hair follicle. Your hairs will stand on end too. But again, through the years, we've kind of evolved not to have that as pronounced as it is in my dog. And there's a little muscle called the erector pili muscle. You know when you get goosebumps? That's your hair standing on end. Sometimes you'll do that when you're cold, and that's going to help you produce more heat. But you'll do that also when you're scared. Have you ever gotten goosebumps when you're scared, or something grosses you out? You get goosebumps? Okay. Yeah. So you'll see that you have that same kind of effect that the dog does when she goes outside and wants to be big. It gives them goosebumps. So there is some nerve stimulation associated with reaction. and the erector pili muscle. So that's hair. So again, the center is called the cuticle. The outer part is called what? Excuse me, the center is called the medulla. In the middle, just like when you studied the brain, where was the medulla? In the middle, where was the cortex? On the outside. Outside the cortex, we see a cuticle, and that is the hair. The follicle wall is live cells. If I pull the hair out too quickly, I'm going to pull out some of those follicular cells in the wall of the hair follicle with us. And that's that little skin tag that you see on hairs that the CSI guys love. Again, those are live cells. So that's hair, and hair follicles are one appendage of skin. What did I do? Am I going the wrong way? Yeah. Again, when you, next week in lab, you're going to look at slides under the microscope. You're going to look at hair follicles. You're going to look at scalp, find the hairs. The other appendage of skin is nails. So nails are extra keratinized, very hard. Yes? Yeah, probably some of you might be interested in that. Yes? Some might be losing your hair. Anybody? I'm not going to point anybody out. But hairs in their hair follicles, not all hair follicles are active all the time. And you'll see this in when you brush your hair in the morning. How many hairs do you lose? You lose a lot, right? Those are hair follicles that have become inactive. They're at rest. They will kick in again and start growing more hair. But hair follicles go into a dormant stage. Well, sometimes they go into a dormant stage and they never wake up. And that's what they talk about under male pattern baldness. This is a genetic phenomenon. It's carried on your sex chromosomes. Does anybody know which chromosome baldness is carried on? The X chromosome. So why is it that more males have male pattern, or pattern baldness, we should call it, than females? No.
Yeah.
Because it's something within the male that actually makes it turn on.
They get it from their mother. You're welcome.
They get it from their mother, yes, but they only have one X chromosome. Females have two.
It's on one, but not on the other.
Correct. If it's on one and not the other, we're okay.
But if it's on
But males only have one. If it's on one, SOL. Yes? So that's why we see it more often in males than in females, and they discuss male pattern. Yeah, oh yeah. Yep, we see it in females as well. Thinning hair, alopecia, we see that in both sexes as well. We start to see it in females, tend to start to see it as we start to get older. According to the textbook, ages 35, we'll see more noticeable hair loss. Occurs in 40% of men. By the age of 60, that number jumps to 85%. Again, much less dramatic in women because we have two X chromosomes that hopefully we don't have baldness on both. But can you? Yes. So we can see that in females also. So, nails. Let us pick up with nails on Thursday. From now, make sure you sign the sign-in sheet. Make sure you pick up your test. And don't forget your clicker for the next couple of classes. Huh? Do you want me to? Oh, I'm going to open it for 10, yes. Oh, yeah, I'm going to open the quiz for Chapter 10, too.
I'm like, is this a trick question? I'm going to answer.
I'm thinking we didn't finish 5, but that's right. So if you didn't sign the sign-in sheet, come sign the sign-in sheet.